An ominous wish echoes in the darkness, proclaiming that number 17 is already dead. A ragged child stands at the mouth of a Colosseum tunnel, gripping a makeshift blade as jeering monsters watch from above. Tears stream down the young girl's face as she faces her opponent in the arena, trembling with fear and hesitation. Number 17 lunges forward with ferocity, her knuckle-dusted fist pulled back for a devastating strike. Blades clash against gauntlets in a flurry of sparks as the two girls engage in a desperate, high-speed melee. A heavy blow connects with brutal impact, sending shockwaves through the air as the fight intensifies. 17 delivers a powerful kick that sends the smaller girl flying, her knife skittering uselessly across the stone floor. With merciless force, a fist slams down, crushing the ground where the fallen fighter lies exposed. 17 straddles her opponent and rains down a barrage of vicious strikes, pummeling her into submission. The crowd's bloodlust reaches a fever pitch as chants of "kill" reverberate through the stadium walls. Standing victorious in her blood-stained dress, 17 looms over the motionless body of her defeated foe. The beast announcer rings the bell and declares absolute victory for number 17, delighting those who bet on the odds. Dropping her combat persona instantly, 17 rushes to the fallen girl's side and frantically asks if number 8 is okay. Back in their holding cell, other prisoners watch in silence as the girls recover from their forced brutal combat. 8 awakens groggily and praises 17's strength, lamenting that she has lost the duel once again. While tending to her wounds, 17 declares that as the older one, she simply cannot afford to lose the fight. Beaming with a warm smile, 17 tells 8 that she sees her as a little sister, causing the younger girl to blush. A pig-like guard interrupts their moment to deliver their meager rations, noting that the younger prisoner rarely speaks. The girls dip their hard bread into watery soup, eating silently in the grim comfort of their cell. 17 prepares to share her portion but freezes when she realizes the reward cheese for winning is missing. A booming voice calls out for number 17, freezing the room in terror as a massive shadow looms in the doorway. The Tiger Master steps inside, cracking his knuckles, his massive frame radiating pure malice and intimidation. He roars in fury, demanding to know how many times he must explain that their job is to entertain the audience. In a blind rage, he kicks 8 across the room, accusing her of ruining the mood for his paying guests. Grabbing 8 by the face, the master forces a terrifying compliance from her as she stammers out a submissive reply. He sneers at the trembling girl, reminding her of her place and her collar with a cruel, mocking praise. With a final act of spite, he crushes their meager meal under his boot, spitting insults at the filthy inferior species. 17 clutches 8 protectively as they tremble together in the aftermath of the brutal assault. A single, knotted lock of hair lies on the ground, a silent testament to the violence that just occurred. The Tiger Master turns his back on the cowering girls and strides out of the cell, leaving despair in his wake. The Tiger Master is interrupted by a panic-stricken minion reporting a raid by security forces. Chaos erupts as the rescuers invade, shouting that humans are a protected species and must not be harmed. Seth complains about the restrictions of the mission, grumbling that high-damage magic is forbidden. A stoic, long-haired commander observes the unfolding operation with a cold, detached gaze. Someone shouts Seth's name in urgency as the situation in the dungeon deteriorates rapidly. The Tiger Master bellows orders to his underlings to capture the fleeing prisoners immediately. Panic spreads among the captives as guards attack with lethal intent to ensure not a single one escapes. 17 reacts with lightning reflexes, deflecting a lethal spear thrust aimed at her protected charge. The arena dissolves into bedlam as prisoners scatter in every direction to evade their captors. Seth grabs 17 amidst the turmoil, assuring her they are here to help and urging her to stay calm. The Tiger Master chases them with a twisted offer of cheese if they stop, while Seth promises freedom if they make it through. A comrade calls out to Seth and the girls, signaling that the escape route is nearby. Hope surges as they spot the exit ahead and sprint towards the promise of safety. Seth screams a warning to stop as he realizes someone is unleashing forbidden high-lethality magic. A devastating magical vortex rips through the corridor, shredding everything in its path including the fleeing prisoners. 17 freezes in absolute horror as the dust settles, revealing the catastrophic aftermath of the spell. An agonizing scream tears from her throat as the reality of the carnage sets in. The rescuers restrain 17, forcing her to look away from the mangled, lifeless body of number 8. The Tiger Master mocks the dead girl as trash for troubling his master, laughing that the attack was close. 17 trembles in the grip of the soldiers, staring blankly at the gruesome remains of her friend. The beast crushes 8's head under his boot, while 17 recalls the girl's claim of being her big sister. A primal roar of grief and rage erupts from 17, shaking the very walls of the dungeon. She violently breaks free from Seth's grasp and sprints back into the Hell's Cape to reach her fallen friend. A mysterious figure watches the desperate girl from a high vantage point, his expression unreadable. Celeste Universe, a near 300-year-old dragonkin, stands observing the chaos, still searching for his fated mate. The air crackles with the residual energy of the magic that just reshaped the battlefield. Though every species has a destined partner chosen by the gods, many live and die without ever finding theirs. Those who are lucky enough to find their one and only always describe the experience in the exact same way. Time seems to stop as the ancient dragonkin and the ragged human girl lock eyes across the battlefield. The prophecy is fulfilled in an instant, for one knows the truth the very moment they lay eyes on them. The Tiger Master staggers back in shock, a dagger buried deep in his chest from a surprise attack. Number 8 collapses in agony, vomiting a torrent of black blood as the lethal curse takes hold of her small body. A blur of motion streaks across the scene, signaling a sudden and violent shift in the battle. Will screams out Seth's name in disbelief as massive crystal wings erupt from his partner's back. The air warps with speed as the dragonkin launches himself forward with unstoppable force. Seth roars with primal fury, his fangs bared as he unleashes his full power to save the girls. With a single devastating strike, Seth impales the Tiger Master on a massive crystal spike while shielding the girl. Blood sprays violently as the Master's body is brutally torn apart by the jagged crystal formations. Seth cradles 8's limp body amidst the carnage, his expression twisting into desperation. His hand glows with intense magical energy as he prepares to cast a spell to save her. A towering prison of crystal encases them, shielding the pair from the outside world. Will watches in awe as the massive crystal structure pierces the Colosseum walls, changing the battlefield. Panic overtakes Seth as he frantically casts High Heal, begging the girl to recover. He shouts for her to wake up, layering spell after spell in a desperate bid to save her life. Tears stream down his face as he screams at her not to die, his composure completely shattered. The Tiger Master clings to life, stumbling forward with a knife still protruding from his chest. He stares in shock at number 8, realizing the timid girl was the one who delivered the fatal blow. A hand reaches out to seize the dying beast, intent on using him for one final purpose. Seth holds 8 tight within the crystal sanctuary, shielded from the violence outside. The dust settles around the protective cocoon of magic as the battlefield falls silent. Seth gasps for breath, sweat pouring down his face as he maintains the intense magical exertion. Will confronts the dying master, demanding the method to release the slave collar. Using the master's own blood as the key, Will unlocks the mechanism and frees 8 from her chains. Seth begs to take over the healing, but Will warns him that she has stopped breathing. Desperation peaks as Seth pours his life force into her, refusing to let her slip away. He performs CPR, shouting at his friend to wake up and not to die on him now. His pleas echo in the silence as he begs the gods or fate to spare her life. A gasp of air breaks the tension, signaling that 8 has finally started breathing again. Overwhelmed with relief, Seth pulls her into a crushing embrace, tears flowing freely. The girl stirs weakly, coughing up the last of the black poison as she murmurs her sister's number. Will asks Seth to check the number on the girl's collar, apologizing for the mix-up. Will pauses, a look of realization and shock crossing his face as he processes the situation. He confirms the identity of the other girl, stating clearly that she is number 17. Seth reassures 8 that it is okay, telling her that number 17 is alive too. He holds her gently as she loses consciousness again, noting she must have passed out from relief. Will looks at his partner with concern, asking if he has finally regained his composure. Tears still in his eyes, Seth confirms he is calm, though his emotions remain raw. He looks up at Will, a profound realization settling in his gaze. Seth declares with absolute certainty that this child is his fated mate. Confusion clouds her mind as she wakes to a throbbing headache, unsure of where she is or what has happened. A desperate voice echoes in her memory, pleading for her not to die while a hand grasps hers tightly. Number 8 opens her eyes, staring blankly at the wooden ceiling of an unfamiliar room. 17 embraces her tightly in the bed, sobbing with relief that 8 is finally alive and awake. Tears flow freely as the two girls hold each other, overwhelmed by the sheer joy of their survival. Pulling back, 17 scolds 8 through her tears, crying that it is not okay because she heard everything and 8 almost died. She tries to compose herself, suggesting they stop crying in the hospital room, though the emotion is still raw. 17 looks at her companion with deep affection, grateful for the simple fact that she is still breathing. She notes that 8 never cried no matter how much she was beaten before, realizing that she is finally free to express her pain. With a tearful smile, 8 looks up and softly calls 17 her big sis, acknowledging their bond. 17 hugs her back fiercely, confirming through her sobs that she is indeed her big sister. A sudden knock at the door shatters the tender moment, drawing their attention to the entrance. Instinct takes over as 8 scrambles out of bed and drops into a defensive stance on the floor, ready for a fight. A calm voice announces that she is finally awake as the door opens. 8 freezes in terror, instantly recognizing the voice of the man standing in the doorway. The man enters pushing a cart, casually stating that he has brought them a meal just in time. He gazes at 8, remarking that she is such a beautiful person, though completely pale. As he steps closer, the sound of his shoes on the floor sends a jolt of panic through the terrified girl. Overcome with trauma, 8 collapses onto the floor, trembling violently in anticipation of pain. The man pauses, noticing her extreme reaction, and asks with concern if she is okay. She flinches dramatically when he moves, causing him to stop in his tracks. Realizing his mistake, he apologizes softly, admitting that he ended up scaring her. He kneels down to her level to appear less threatening and assures her that he is not her enemy. Trembling, 8 looks up and asks with a heartbreaking fragility if he is going to hit her. With a gentle expression, he firmly promises that he will not hit her. He asks permission to touch her and advises her to get off the cold floor so she doesn't get sick. As he looms over her, 8 can only think about how large and imposing this person is. A spread of warm soup and fresh bread is laid out, steam rising invitingly from the bowls. While 17 explains they never had warm meals or spoons before, 8 stares in disbelief at the feast. The man feeds 8 a spoonful of soup, gently stating he is just going to touch her a little as they eat. Celeste introduces himself as a member of the Granswell security unit, asking the girls to listen while they eat. He explains that the illegal gambling den was raided, and as slaves, they have been taken into protective custody. With a gentle finality, he delivers the life-changing news that they are finally free. Number 8 stares blankly, her mind unable to process the concept of freedom after so much trauma. Celeste leans in with a reassuring smile, promising her that no one will ever hit her again. Overwhelmed by his kindness, the young girl offers a small, hesitant nod of understanding. He clarifies that they are currently under security force protection but will soon be moved to an orphanage in the human zone. A heavy silence falls as Celeste gazes at 8 with a serious, unreadable expression. He hesitates, his composure cracking slightly as he struggles to voice the true reason for his interest. Dropping a bombshell, Celeste reveals that number 8 is his destined partner. 8 freezes with a piece of bread in her hand, utterly confused by the sudden declaration. Kneeling beside the bed, Celeste explains that a mate is a fated spouse chosen by the gods. 8 stares at him in shock, her eyes wide as she tries to comprehend the weight of his words. He confirms that this bond is exactly why he was so desperate to save her from the arena. Gently placing his hand over hers, he explains that dragonkin treasure their mates above all else and grant their every wish. He admits that customary tradition dictates they live together, implying he wishes to take her in immediately. However, he quickly adds that he will not force the arrangement if she hates the idea. Unexpectedly, 8 slides off the bed and crawls towards him on the floor. Celeste looks down in surprise as the small girl reaches out to touch his face with trembling hands. With innocent concern, 8 asks if he is okay, commenting on how big he is while checking his cheek. Celeste leans into her touch, blushing slightly as he thanks her for her kindness. He advises them to think about their future, offering the choice between staying together at an orphanage or separating. Before leaving to let them rest, he mentions he will return later to clear the dishes. Once alone, 17 asks if Celeste is an enemy, but 8 quickly reassures her that he is not scary. 17 recalls her mother's stories about mates bringing happiness and urges 8 to go with Celeste. 8 refuses to leave her friend behind, asking with tears in her eyes if 17 can become one too. Smiling brightly, 17 declares she has a good idea that will solve their dilemma. Elsewhere, a frantic man rushes onto a balcony and shouts for Seth, who is leaning against the railing. The newcomer grabs Seth by the collar, demanding to know if it is true that he refused to take in number 1. Seth remains calm despite the aggression, clarifying that he didn't refuse, but merely put the matter on hold. Will throttles Seth in a fit of jealous rage, screaming about the unfairness of Seth finding his number 1, while he remains alone. Composing himself, Seth explains that his mate is human and lacks the dragon senses to recognize their fated bond. Will leans in with serious eyes, asking if Seth can really accept a relationship where the connection is unreciprocated. Leaning over the railing, Seth admits that suppressing his instincts is painful and the thought of separation is heartbreaking. Will looks at him with dawning realization, asking if Seth truly desires a child in that way. Seth softly lists his pure intentions, longing only to protect her, cherish her warmth, and see her smile. Celeste Universe stands silently behind the iron railing, having overheard the entire conversation between the two knights. The ancient dragon declares that he would obey his mate's will instantly, finding the act of letting them choose impressive. A cynical smile crosses Seth's face as he notes that such absolute devotion makes one look exactly like a slave. Celeste agrees with a gentle smile and excuses himself, prioritizing the menial task of clearing his mate's dishes. Alone on the balcony, Seth bites his thumb in frustration, his gaze dark as he dwells on the concept of a fated mate. Seth uses his wind magic to gently dry the girls' hair, attending to them with a care they have never known. He watches them with a soft expression, his question hanging silently in the air as the grooming session ends. In the bath, 17 washes 8's hair, the warm water and soap scrubbing away the grime of their past life. Wet footprints trail across the wooden floor as the girls step out, clean and vulnerable in their new environment. 17 calls out in surprise, asking number 8 where she is going in such a hurry. 8 declares she must go outside to speak to Mr. Celeste about the mate misunderstanding, insisting it is important. The girls press against the window, mesmerized by the vibrant street below that is teeming with ordinary people. They identify a dwarf, a bird beast man, and an elf, finally spotting a tall dragonkin who reminds them of Mr. Celeste. 8 points out a demon race lizard man, admitting that while she has never seen one, his appearance is frightening. A voice mentions Seth's mate, drawing their attention to the reality of their situation. A sharp, focused eye tracks their movement, signaling the arrival of a new, powerful presence. A man intercepts them with blinding speed, feigning an attack that forces the combat-trained girls to react instantly. He smiles casually, telling them to watch out, as if the near collision was merely a clumsy accident. Laughing off their defensive stance, he assures them he won't do anything, despite having easily breached their guard. 8 stares at him in shock, realizing that this man has absolutely no presence yet possesses terrifying strength. The stranger introduces himself as Wilzeal, a friend of Mr. Celeste, though the air around him remains chillingly cold. He looms over the girls, stating bluntly and with a cold smile that, honestly, he doesn't really like them. He reveals that while he was initially glad the mate was found, seeing his friend suffer has changed his mind. Leaning in close, Wilzeal demands to know exactly what 8 thinks of Celeste. 8 looks away, stammering quietly that she believes Mr. Celeste is a good person. Wilzeal explains that for dragonkin, devoting themselves to their mate is their greatest joy and sole purpose. He questions why she hesitates to be taken in by Seth, visibly annoyed that she hasn't accepted his friend's devotion. 8 is confused by his logic, struggling to understand the concept of using someone she cares about. Wilzeal spells it out, asking if she is hesitating because she feels it is wrong to exploit his feelings as a mate. He presses the attack, accusing her of letting guilt prevent her from accepting the help Seth is desperate to give. 8 falls silent, her internal conflict exposed by the stranger's sharp intuition. Wilzeal bursts into loud, carefree laughter, confirming that his assessment of her character was correct. He grins, telling her she should just abandon her guilt and use Seth as much as she wants. He argues that since Seth gets to be with his mate and she gets a home, it is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Wilzeal concludes that as Celeste's best friend, he hates seeing him suffer, even if he is a little annoyed she is taking him away. Celeste returns to the room and calls out to Wilzeal, who is waiting for him inside. Wilzeal turns around with a bright smile, greeting Celeste as he enters the space. Wilzeal explains to the group that he was just chatting with number 8 and her friend while Celeste was away. Looking down at number 8, Celeste apologizes for the boredom and asks if she needs anything to help pass the time. Number 8 reflects silently on Wilzeal's words about dragonkin finding their greatest joy in being with their mates. She reaches out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the fabric of Celeste's clothing. With a determined look, number 8 grabs Celeste's sleeve and asks if they can go together right now. She gazes up at him with wide, pleading eyes, waiting for his response. Trembling slightly, she asks Celeste if he is truly okay with her being by his side. Celeste responds with a soft, reassuring smile, and number 8 bows her head in a quiet, "Thank you." Stepping closer, she looks up at Celeste and asks if he would please give her a proper name. Her friend DC immediately cheers, exclaiming that she wants a new name from Celeste as well. Will Zeal encourages the idea, while Celeste admits with a hand to his chin that he isn't very good at naming things. After a moment of thought, Celeste decides on the new identities for the two girls. He officially names number 8, Yui, and number 17, DC. DC laughs at how simple the names are, while Will Zeal chuckles in the background. The girls repeat their new names to each other, with DC looking thrilled and Yui looking contemplative. DC hugs Yui tightly in celebration as Celeste and Will Zeal watch the two children bond. Celeste leans down to eye level and calls Yui by her new name for the first time. Yui grips his shirt and softly repeats, "Thank you," as she accepts her new identity. Celeste's face lights up with a warm, genuine smile as he looks at her. Will Zeal notes that it's a cute name for Celeste to come up with, while Celeste feels a sense of relief for finally saying it. A beautiful woman named Valentine Nibarby enters, introducing herself as a member of the same second guard squad as Celeste. Valentine turns to DC with a kind smile and announces that she will be her official guardian. DC introduces herself politely, mentioning she is 13 years old and asking Valentine to take care of her. DC explains that she specifically requested a guardian from the same place as Celeste so she could stay close to Yui. Valentine laughs and explains that it's common for dragonkin to bring their mates to work, so the girls can see each other anytime. Overjoyed by the news, the two girls share a tight, emotional embrace. Celeste kneels before Yui and promises to do his absolute best to make sure she is comfortable in her new life. Yui watches him closely, her mind reflecting on the partnership they are about to begin. Yui resolves to use Celeste's kindness for her own sake so she won't be a burden, vowing they will do their best together. Celeste and Yui seal their new bond with a firm, trusting handshake. Celeste gently adjusts the girl's cape, asking if she feels uncomfortable, to which she quietly replies that she is fine. The older girl stares in amazement at the fine quality of the garment draped around her friend. Outside on the street, Valentine calls for DC to come along, signaling the moment of departure. Celeste reassures Yui that although she will be apart from DC for a little while, they will see each other again soon. A quiet, heavy pause hangs in the air as the two friends prepare to go their separate ways. Unable to hold back, DC rushes forward and pulls Yui into a tight, emotional embrace. Celeste extends a welcoming hand toward Yui, gently inviting her to come home with him. Placing her trust in him, Yui reaches out and firmly grasps his large, protective hand. The pair walks down the cobblestone street, the towering dragonkin guiding the small girl through the town. Passers-by whisper with amusement, wondering if the two are siblings due to their shared silver hair. They arrive at the waiting carriage that will take them the rest of the way. Celeste warns Yui that he is going to touch her, preparing to move with sudden intensity. Yui gasps in shock as the world around her instantly blurs into a streak of motion. She clings to him as he moves with blinding speed, marveling that the transit was incredibly fast. Momentum slows as they land softly, the burst of high-speed travel coming to an end. Settled in the carriage, Celeste admits he rushed because he was worried about her health in the cold air. He offers her a large apple to eat, noting that sitting on hardwood is tough on a child. Yui stammers over the word palm, and Celeste explains with a smile that it simply means apple. The carriage stops before a grand estate, which Celeste proudly introduces as his home. Inside, the household staff bows in greeting, and the head maid introduces herself as Celine Audran. Celine introduces her daughter, Adelaide, who will be personally responsible for assisting Lady Yui. Yui stares at the servant, unnerved by the fact that the air around her feels strangely cold. Celine leans in close, her sharp eyes scanning Yui's appearance with a critical but motherly gaze. She asks permission to tidy up Yui's hair, preparing to groom the disheveled child. As she snips away, Celine notes the damage to Yui's hair and requests scented oil from Celeste to treat it. The maid suggests letting Yui pick out clothes designs she likes and mentions she has prepared temporary attire. Tears well up in Yui's eyes as she heartbreakingly confesses that she doesn't know what she likes. A gentle voice assures her that from this moment on, she has the freedom to discover many things she enjoys. Yui looks up with wide, hopeful eyes, the realization of her new freedom slowly sinking in. Dressed in a clean gown, Yui stands shyly before Celeste, who smiles warmly and tells her she looks very cute. The head maid receives orders to slice the poem from earlier as dinner preparations begin, with Celeste instructing the staff with a gentle smile. A slab of meat sizzles violently in the pan alongside chopped vegetables, the aroma of searing food filling the kitchen air. The final dish is served steaming hot and perfectly prepared, revealing a hearty plate of fried rice glistening with flavor. Celeste praises the delicious flavor and urges Yui to eat her fill, explaining that dragonkin love meat and encouraging her to consume as much as she desires. He explains that Celine has worked for him for nearly 10 years, inheriting her wonderful cooking skills from her mother who was also a talented chef. Yui nibbles on her bread and asks if it has been a long time, hesitantly querying if addressing him as Lord Celeste is acceptable. Celeste confirms the title is fine while explaining the immense longevity of his race, stating that dragonkin live between 1500 and 2000 years. He details that dwarves live about 500 years and beastkin around 250, while elves possess even greater longevity of up to 1500 years. Yui quietly asks about humans, her voice small against the weight of the conversation as Celeste pauses to consider the brief nature of her kind. A shadow of realization crosses Yui's face as the truth settles in, her eyes reflecting a quiet melancholy at the unspoken answer. Celeste offers a gentle smile, knowing she has already grasped the harsh reality that a human's lifespan is a mere flicker, lasting at most 100 years. The knife slices cleanly through the fruit as Yui reflects on her fragile mortality, realizing her life was destined to end much sooner than becoming number 8. She accepts the cruel fate that she will inevitably pass away before the people who care for her, the weight of her short existence pressing down on her young heart. In a quiet moment from the past, Valentine questions Celeste about his application to become a foster parent as they stand on a sunlit terrace. Celeste admits he is getting old and wants to train successors, figuring that spending 100 years raising a child would break the boredom of living alone. Valentine teases him with a sly smile, noting that while 700 years is old for an elf, he is surely not that aged yet. They acknowledge that humans are fleeting creatures, and Valentine bluntly states the painful truth that the child will pass away long before he does. Celeste confirms he understands the heartbreak but remains resolved to take the child in regardless, accepting the inevitable sorrow of outliving his charge. Valentine compliments his suitability as a guardian as memories surface of Celeste watching over playful children in the past. Years fly by in memory as a former foster child excitedly shows Celeste their own offspring, announcing that he has finally become a grandpa. The vibrant memory fades into the stillness of a coffin filled with white flowers, where Celeste stands silently over the body of the one who passed on before him. Back in the present, Celeste gently wipes Yui's face, his heart heavy with the knowledge that 100 years is merely a fleeting moment for him. Celeste greets Yui with a gentle good morning, and summons soft magical lights to illuminate the room. Yui rubs her sleepy eyes as they descend the stairs, questioning the source of the mysterious lights. Celeste tenderly brushes Yui's hair, caring for her appearance with a focused and gentle expression. At the breakfast table, Celeste snaps his fingers and commands a small flame to appear. He directs the fire to heat the food on the plate, demonstrating his magical ability. Celeste serves the warm meal to Yui, cautioning her to be careful because it is hot. He explains that starting today he will be on duty, and Yui will join him at the station to see DC. A notification sounds, indicating that the transport has arrived to take them to the station. A sudden, sharp noise cuts through the air, startling the occupants of the room. The buzzer rings out loudly, causing Yui to freeze in absolute terror as the sound triggers a traumatic memory. Celeste turns around in concern, calling Yui's name as he notices her sudden distress. Yui trembles uncontrollably under the table, gasping for breath in a state of panic. Memories of pain and a collar around her neck flood her mind, associating the sound with past abuse. Celeste rushes to her side, reassuring her that it was only the visitor announcement buzzer and she is safe. Overcome with fear and relief, Yui bursts into tears and clings to Celeste. Celeste looks up with a serious expression, ordering the staff to wait for a moment while he comforts her. The staff apologizes profusely, promising that they have changed the buzzer so that specific sound will never play again. Celeste holds Yui close, firmly promising that there is no one here who will ever hit her again. Yui presses against him, noticing the size of his hands as he strokes her hair. Safe in his arms, she feels a comforting warmth that chases away the cold fear of her memories. As the time to leave approaches, Celeste entrusts the house to the head maid before preparing to depart. Yui feels a pang of loneliness leaving his direct warmth, but Celeste checks if she is steady enough to stand. They arrive at the imposing building of the Granzel's second guard station. DC rushes forward to greet them, excitedly exclaiming that Yui's new haircut is very cute. Valentine explains that she will strictly teach the girls reading and writing since her other duties are finished. Yui and DC enthusiastically declare that they will try their best to learn. Yui looks up at Celeste with a silent gaze, sensing that he must now go to work. Celeste tells Valentine he is counting on her to call him if anything happens, then promises Yui he will see her at lunch. Valentine watches him leave, noting that a normal dragonkin would never leave their mate's side due to their extreme possessiveness. She begins the tour of the station, showing Yui the library and lounge where they are allowed to spend their time. A stern voice commands the trainee to use their upper body instead of just their arms, echoing across the training ground. Valentine approaches the towering lizard man, greeting Charles warmly as he pauses his rigorous workout. She introduces the two children hiding behind her, identifying Yui as Celeste's partner and the other as DC. The massive lizard man turns his gaze toward them, causing DC to flinch and hide behind her friend in fear. He politely introduces himself as Charles Lacour, bowing slightly to the small girl standing before him. Yui notices DC trembling behind her, paralyzed by the intimidating presence of the demon race warrior. Charles sighs with a resigned smile, assuring them he is used to such reactions and that they shouldn't worry. Summoning her courage, DC pops out and loudly introduces herself, shouting that she is being taken care of by Miss Valentine. Charles praises her bravery with a nod, acknowledging the effort it took to speak up. He explains that just as humans have different species, the demon race includes various types like his own lizardman lineage. Yui stares intently at his arm, mesmerized by the glimmering texture and whispering that his scales are beautiful. Charles freezes in shock, his tail twitching violently as the unexpected compliment catches him off guard. Yui quickly apologizes, fearing she has offended him by staring too openly at his appearance. Valentine steps in to explain that for a lizardman, praising a male's scales is equivalent to a marriage proposal. She teasingly adds that while he should be proud, he must be careful, leaving Yui flustered by the misunderstanding. Curiosity getting the better of her, Yui whispers a question about whether touching his tail is allowed. Valentine laughs and warns that touching the tail is also reserved for spouses, noting that Celeste would be driven mad with jealousy. Charles offers a compromise, stating that while the tail is off-limits, he does not mind if she touches his arm. Yui reaches out gently, her small fingers tracing the hard, cool surface of his scaled arm. He explains that their vertical pupils and night vision are traits inherited from dragons, confirming their shared lineage. Charles gestures to the illuminated hallways, pointing out that the house is lit at night specifically for her sake. Yui realizes that since dragonkin and lizardmen can see in the dark, the lights are a thoughtful gesture from Celeste. A warm feeling spreads in her chest as she understands that he changed his home just to make her comfortable. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she thanks Charles for helping her see the kindness woven into her new life. She smiles up at him, telling him he is not scary at all and thanking him for his gentleness. Valentine beams with agreement, confirming that Charles is indeed a kind and gentle man. Inspired by the training session, DC jumps forward and eagerly asks if she can try practicing too. Yui clutches a practice sword, admitting she wants to become strong enough to work alongside everyone instead of just relying on help. Valentine suggests they let the children try, believing that letting them work might satisfy their desire to be useful. Yui stands determined in the courtyard, holding the wooden sword with a serious expression. Wilzeal suddenly crouches down with a grin, offering to be her opponent for the sparring match. He draws his practice blade with a playful smile, challenging her to show him what she can do. Yui lunges forward with dual wooden swords, initiating a fierce training duel against the relaxed Wilzeal. Wilzeal observes her approach with a calm smile, noting the impressive speed of her initial movement. The girl unleashes a rapid spinning slash, her body blurring as she aims for her opponent. A sharp sound cuts through the air as the wooden blades slice through the space between them. Wilzeal analyzes her messy form and sheer volume of attacks, realizing that even wooden swords are heavy and troublesome to block. Yui grits her teeth in frustration, painfully aware that Wilzeal is vastly stronger than her despite her efforts. She despairs internally, realizing that even her full power is insufficient to make her a match for him. Her frustration mounts as she notices he has not counterattacked even once, merely deflecting her dual strikes with one hand. Yui realizes he hasn't moved a single step and fears that failing this training means she will remain a burden to Celeste. Determination hardens her gaze as she decides she must stop treating this as practice and fight for real. She drops low and swipes at his legs, forcing Wilzeal to jump and note that such dangerous moves aren't taught to recruits. A dark realization strikes him as he recognizes her fighting style is that of a disposable combat slave. Yui gasps for breath, exhausted and demoralized by her inability to land a single scratch on her opponent. A traumatic memory surfaces, the jaws of a beast overlapping with reality as a voice commands number 8 to fight. The voice in her head insists her only worth is in killing and winning, while Wilzeal notices her dropping performance and asks if she is throwing the match. Yui trembles violently as the phantom sounds of metal and abuse echo loudly in her mind. Tears well up in her eyes as she struggles to suppress the rising panic and physical sickness. Wilzeal lowers his weapon and suggests she go home to rest, concerned that she looks unwell. She fiercely refuses to leave, desperate to stay with her new family even if only for a short while. Memories of her parents flash through her mind, grounding her desire to be useful and present. An overwhelming wave of guilt washes over her as she mentally apologizes to her parents for her weakness and dependence. She grits her teeth, her expression twisting into one of desperate self-loathing and determination. The mantra of being a useless child repeats in her mind, driving her to push her body beyond its limits. She launches herself forward with explosive speed, catching Wilzeal off guard with a sudden increase in intensity. Their swords clash violently, the impact resonating through the training hall as she pours everything into the strike. Valentine watches in shock alongside the lizard man, stunned by the raw power the small girl is suddenly displaying. Wilzeal barely blocks a heavy overhead strike, the force of the blow reverberating through his defensive stance. He struggles to keep up with her relentless assault, forced to dodge and weave as she attacks with wild abandon. Wilzeal realizes he could easily hurt her if he isn't careful, but her agility is pushing him into a corner where holding back is difficult. He frantically tries to call off the match, shouting that she wins, but she is too lost in her trance to hear him. Panic sets in as she targets his feet, and he realizes that a misstep now could lead to a serious accident. A terrifying thought crosses his mind, paralyzing him with the fear of what Celeste would do if he dared to injure his mate. Yui lunges for a final, desperate strike, her wooden sword aiming for a critical hit. A sudden splash of water interrupts the fight as Celeste steps in, apologizing to Wilzeal while taking control of the situation. He dumps the remaining water over Yui, telling her to cool her head and snap out of her frenzy. The water drips from her hair and clothes, the shock effectively breaking her trance and halting her movement. She looks up with wide, confused eyes, slowly recognizing the blurred figure of Celeste standing before her. Celeste rushes forward to catch the collapsing Yui, his face etched with worry as the intense training session comes to an abrupt halt. Water drips heavily from his silver hair and face as he catches his breath, his expression shifting from panic to intense relief. A single droplet falls onto Yui's hand, the cold sensation stirring her from her daze as reality slowly seeps back in. Yui blinks her eyes open, looking up in confusion at the looming, blurred figure of Celeste standing over her. Celeste gently asks if the water hurt her, his voice laced with concern for her fragile human state. She shakes her head, assuring him she knows the magic was not intended to cause her any harm. Wilzeal leans against the doorframe, admitting he watched the whole spectacle from the corridor, prompting a quiet thanks from Celeste. Celeste extends a hand to Yui, gently commanding her to come with him away from the damp training ground. He explains that his water-based magic makes him resistant to temperature changes, but suddenly realizes she might be freezing. Wilzeal chimes in with a sharp reminder that Yui is just an ordinary human, snapping Celeste out of his dragonkin perspective. A look of guilt crosses Celeste's face as he apologizes, realizing his negligence could have caused her to catch a cold. Yui tears up, trembling as she asks Celeste if there is anything she should be doing to be useful to him. Celeste softens, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and understanding at her desperate need to serve. He explains that the state provides financial support for adopted human children, so she has absolutely no need to worry about money. Valentine steps in with a warm smile, reinforcing that Yui shouldn't worry about burdening them. She proudly adds that she earns a good salary herself and is fully capable of supporting her partner. Yui looks down, the reassurance clashing with her ingrained belief that she must be useful to survive. Celeste kneels to her level and asks a piercing question. Does she actually like fighting? Violent memories of blood and corpses flash through Yui's mind as she stammers a reply, haunted by her past. Tears stream down her face as she confesses that she doesn't want to hurt anyone or get hurt herself. Celeste smiles warmly, telling her that when the time comes, she should simply choose a job she loves. He stands up, declaring that regardless of her choice, they will start by teaching her to read and write. Yui nods obediently, a small sense of relief washing over her at the simple directive. Celeste tells her to put on her coat to stay warm while he dries her off with magic. Yui stares up at the tall dragonkin, processing the kindness and the sudden change in her destiny. Wilzeal speaks up, noting that she was stubborn about being useful despite being told she could just rely on Seth. He asks if fighting was her way of trying to be useful, realizing the depth of her desperation. With a smirk, he confesses that he has changed his opinion of her a little bit after seeing her resolve. Yui realizes she wasn't hurt because Will was strong enough to hold back, acknowledging the vast gap in their power. Her mind wanders to those who were weak or ill in her past, realizing that unlike them, she has been given a chance to survive. Yui stands frozen in place, her thoughts drifting darkly to the memory of those who have died. Unable to hold back, she rushes forward and buries her face in his chest, clinging to him for reassurance. Tears shimmy in her eyes as she looks up, thanking him with deep sincerity for not causing her any harm. Celeste gently calls her to come closer, concerned that the rising wind is making her feel too cold. Wilzeal watches the scene with a hand on his hilt, wondering if her intensity is just part of her nature. Celeste explains that Valentine used magic to dry her clothes and kindly asks if she feels completely dry now. Seeking warmth, Yui clambers up onto the bench to sit beside him without a second thought. She realizes she has naturally settled onto his lap again, blushing furiously as he thanks her for her concern. On the grass, DC yells in protest, complaining that Charles using his tail to attack during sparring is unfair. Valentine watches the lively practice session, noting with a smile that DC seems to love being active. Celeste suddenly shifts the mood, turning to address Valentine with a tone that demands immediate attention. He pulls Yui close and smiles chillingly, demanding to know why he smells another man's scent on her besides his own. His lethal gaze falls on Wilzeal as he asks if it is him, causing the terrified man to frantically deny touching her. The air turns freezing cold around them, the sheer terror of his jealous smile silencing the entire group. Yui lunges forward with her wooden sword, calling out Charles's name as the massive lizard man crouches in a defensive stance to meet her attack. Valentine and Wilzeal observe from the sidelines, deducing that Charles allowed Yui to touch him, which is why his scent has clung to her. Wilzeal smirks, noting that despite his grumbling, Charles must be secretly delighted that someone wasn't afraid to approach him. Yui stares in awe at the lizardman's strength, internally concluding that as a tool of war he is far superior to her in every way. A hand suddenly grabs Yui's cape from behind, jerking her to a halt as she turns to see who has interrupted her thoughts. She looks up to find Celeste looming over her, his expression unreadable and intense as he stares down at her. Celeste forces a strained, painful smile and asks if she enjoyed touching Charles's scales, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Yui senses the heavy atmosphere and asks if he is angry, but Celeste avoids her gaze and sits down heavily on a nearby bench. He lowers his eyes and quietly denies being angry, though his face is etched with a deep and obvious melancholy. Celeste explains that smelling another male on her is like finding a stranger's perfume on a partner, admitting it makes him feel deeply unsettled. Tears well in his eyes as he confesses that dragonkin are intensely jealous creatures who cannot bear the scent of others on their mates. Yui stares at him in confusion, trying to process his words before bluntly asking if what he is feeling is jealousy. Celeste apologizes for his irrationality, admitting he knows she is free to make friends but confessing that his instincts still cause him pain. Yui watches him closely, her heart aching as she realizes that her actions have unintentionally caused him visible suffering. She stares at his large, trembling hand, realizing that this powerful being is far more emotionally fragile than she ever imagined. Concepts of marriage and couples swirl confusingly in her mind as she struggles to grasp the full weight of being his destined life partner. A wave of guilt crashes over her as she realizes Celeste is hurting because of her, prompting her to call out his name in distress. Yui bows her head and apologizes profusely, desperate to ease the pain she sees on his face. Celeste looks up in shock, stunned that she is the one apologizing when he feels the fault is entirely his own. He frantically reassures her, insisting that she did nothing wrong and that the blame lies solely with his own possessive nature. Self-deprecatingly, he admits he was the one who forced this partnership on her simply because destiny dictated she was his mate. The work bell rings for the third time, shattering the moment and forcing Celeste to abruptly announce that he must return to duty. He turns away with a pained expression, telling Yui not to trouble herself with his problems as he prepares to leave. Celeste entrusts Yui to Valentine's care with a heavy heart before walking away, leaving a lingering silence behind him. Yui stands rooted to the spot, watching his retreating figure with a mixture of confusion and deep sadness. Valentine steps in and apologizes, admitting she underestimated just how deeply and quickly dragonkin attached to their mates. She thanks Yui for her kindness, while Charles the Lizard Man stands quietly in the background, observing the aftermath. Wilzeal scratches his head in frustration, wondering aloud if he was too reckless in letting Yui interact so closely with the Lizard Man. He turns to Charles and asks if the Lizard Man noticed the strange, faint magical energy emanating from the girl. A flashback reveals Yui's sword glowing with power as Wilzeal notes that humans possessing magic are an extremely rare and dangerous anomaly. A young companion asks if he intends to pursue Celeste, but he offers only a quiet refusal. Valentine stands resolute with a clenched fist, declaring that the moment to act has not yet arrived. He stares down at his own hand, captivated by the lingering sensation of a recent touch. The memory of that physical connection remains vivid as he focuses intensely on his open palm. Slumping onto a bench, he attempts to distance himself by reminding himself that Yui is merely a human child. He reasons that her history as a slave has likely blinded her to her true status and their bond as destined partners. Yet he is shaken to realize that the mere thought of another man touching her is profoundly unsettling to him. Covering his mouth in contemplation, he struggles to grasp the underlying reason for his intense reaction. He imagines walking beside her, overwhelmed by a possessive need to keep her close and untouched by anyone else. He tries to convince himself this is not love, but simply the biological instinct of a dragon toward his mate. Wrestling with jealousy, he wonders if this deep longing is a genuine emotion or just an illusion of his nature. Despite knowing almost nothing about her, he stares at his hand and admits a desperate craving to learn more. He fears that closing the distance might make her hate him, torn between the patience to wait and a frantic desire for answers. The terrifying possibility of rejection looms over him, and he wonders if he could even survive such pain. Yui suddenly strolls past his hiding spot, laughing carefree with a beast-man's servant while he sits in silence. Valentine looks up in a cold sweat, his eyes widening as he watches her retreating figure vanish down the hall. He admits he withdrew to avoid losing control but acknowledges that a dragon cannot run from his nature forever. Steeling his resolve, Valentine decides he must finally face the reality of having found his destined partner. Reaching out, he demands to be taught exactly what it means to be a dragon's partner so he can truly understand. Valentine begins her lecture with a serious air, stating that for dragonkin, a soulmate is a truly special and absolute existence. She turns to the girls with a knowing smile, asking exactly how much they already know about the concept of soulmates. DC cheerfully pipes up, recalling her mother's words that a soulmate is a destined partner chosen by the gods themselves. Valentine nods and raises a hand, preparing to explain the 5 main races that divide humanity before diving deeper. She notes that while demons like Charles exist in Glanzel, most of the city's inhabitants belong to the human races. Valentine describes dragonkin as a powerful, long-lived race with slit pupils and innate magic, noting that Celeste's calm nature is rare for his kind. DC shudders at the thought of an angry Celeste, while Valentine warns that provoking a dragonkin is indeed a massive problem. She moves on to elves, the people of the forest, explaining that while physically weaker than dragonkin, they possess potent magic. Images of beast folk and dwarves appear as she highlights the former's physical prowess and the latter's master craftsmanship. Finally, she speaks of humans like Yui, a rare and protected species with vast individual differences but often lacking magical ability. Valentine narrows her eyes, revealing that among all races, dragonkin possess the absolute strongest instincts regarding their soulmates. An image of Celeste flashes by as the narration describes the bond as something that instantly engraves itself into their very blood and soul. Yui looks down at her hands, quietly admitting that she likes Celeste specifically because they are soulmates. Fear creeps into her voice as she asks if she will be abandoned if the bond fades, but Valentine firmly assures her that will never happen. Valentine leans in with serious intensity, declaring that a dragonkin has only one soulmate in their entire lifetime, and for Celeste, that is Yui. Yui clutches her chest, startled by the sudden wave of relief that washes over her at Valentine's words. Valentine asks if she can imagine a person she wants to cherish forever, someone who fills her heart just by being near. Memories of her parents flood Yui's mind, recalling how just seeing her face gave them strength despite their pain. She remembers their final moments, holding their hands as they thanked her for being their child before passing on. A heartbreaking image of her mother in a hospital bed lingers in her mind, emphasizing the cruel finality of death. Tears well up as Yui's inner voice screams how desperately she wanted to be with them for much, much longer. DC calls her name, snapping Yui out of her tragic reverie and bringing her back to the present moment. Valentine explains that dragonkin never want to lose their beloved, which is why they feel overwhelming jealousy at another's scent. She smiles fondly, recounting that Celeste's parents were a dragonkin and an elf who lived happily despite their different races. Valentine assures Yui that being a dragonkin's soulmate guarantees she will never have to struggle to survive ever again. Yui asks about Wilzeal, and Valentine dismisses him as an idiot with a twisted way of showing his obsession with friendship. Yui bluntly concludes that Wilzeal is weird and scary, shrinking back in her chair at the thought of him. Valentine defines a soulmate as someone compatible chosen by the gods, then asks Yui if she has ever hated being with Celeste. Yui hesitates, comparing Valentine's gentle hands to the feeling of Celeste's touch. A soft realization dawns on her as she concludes that Celeste's touch feels even gentler than anything else. DC explains that Yui is free to define her bond with her mate however she chooses, assuring her that becoming life partners is not a requirement. She gently suggests that simply considering Celeste's feelings would be enough, noting that friendship alone would make him happy. Yui lowers her gaze with a heavy heart, whispering a firm refusal to ever hurt Lord Celeste. Moved by the girl's kindness, DC wishes Celeste could hear those words before suddenly lighting up with a brilliant idea. She enthusiastically proposes that Yui write a letter to Celeste, declaring it the perfect way to learn new words while creating a gift he would cherish. The suggestion sparks immediate joy, and Yui's eyes sparkle with excitement as her friend eagerly volunteers to write one as well. Yui reflects that while speaking is difficult for her, the old her once loved reading, making the prospect of a letter deeply appealing. They waste no time getting started, and her friend spreads out a chart to begin teaching Yui the alphabet. Pointing to the first character, the tutor identifies it as I, but Yui stares at the symbol with a look of sudden bewilderment. Her friend moves to the next letter but stops to ask what is wrong, noticing Yui's stunned silence as she gazes at the paper. Yui stares in shock at the characters before her, realizing with disbelief that she is looking at a Japanese hiragana chart. A haunting flashback reveals two ragged children huddled together in the darkness, their clasped hands serving as their only lifeline in a cruel world. The scene shifts to the present struggle of literacy, where cryptic symbols and messy scribbles mark the difficult first steps of learning to write. Yui stares intently at the chart of 50 sounds, realizing the shapes are different from what she knows but resolving to master them through observation. Concentration fills the room as the girls grip their quills, the scratching of nibs against paper replacing the silence of their intense focus. Valentine oversees their progress with a strict but encouraging gaze, assuring them that the awkwardness of writing will fade with persistent practice. DC beams with pride after successfully writing Valentine's name, while Yui asks for help recalling a specific character to complete her own word. Valentine praises their incredible speed, predicting they will master reading and writing by day's end due to Yui's amazing memory. A gentle hand pats DC's head in reward, the warm praise bringing a bright, happy flush to the young girl's cheeks as she basks in the attention. Yui pauses with her quill in hand, her expression softening into a rare, quiet melancholy as she processes the warmth of the moment. Valentine's sharp eyes catch the subtle change, and she points out with surprise that Yui has finally let a genuine smile slip through her defenses. Yui touches her face in confusion, unsure of her own expression, while DC and Valentine gush over how cute her rare smile truly is. The lesson advances to a practical test as Valentine instructs them to write a letter, prompting DC to tease that Celeste might get jealous. Faced with a blank sheet of paper, Yui hesitates under the instruction to write whatever she wants, the freedom feeling both daunting and precious. Her mind races with thoughts of gratitude and guilt, deciding she must apologize for the earlier incident and thank him for his kindness. Silence descends on the room as the girls focus entirely on their letters, Valentine watching over them like a silent, protective guardian. The bell in the clock tower tolls loudly, signaling the passage of time just as the heavy doors to the room burst open. Celeste rushes in with a look of frantic worry, but is immediately stopped in his tracks as Yui runs forward and buries her face in his chest. Valentine explains that Yui has written a letter for him, and the stunned dragonkin freezes as the small girl shyly presents her work. Trembling hands open the paper to reveal scrawled, messy letters expressing her happiness at learning to write and her desire to communicate. As he reads, Yui's voiceover thanks him for the light he brought into her world and for the honesty he shared about his nature. Tears well up in Celeste's eyes as he reads her gratitude for accepting her, the simple words piercing straight through to his heart. Memories of her salvation play out in her mind, acknowledging the moment he pulled her from the verge of death and gave her a future. She lists every small kindness he bestowed, from the warm bed and food to the simple act of walking slowly so she could keep up. The letter concludes with a heartfelt declaration of thanks, the words thumping in time with the racing beat of her anxious heart. Yui thanks him for the greatest gift of all, giving her a name, and waits breathlessly for his reaction to her clumsy but sincere writing. Overcome with emotion, Celeste presses the letter to his chest and vows to treasure it forever, his tears flowing freely in relief. Yui recalls his earlier confession that he only helped her because of their soulmate bond, a statement that had left her feeling conflicted. She looks him in the eye and admits that while he claims it's just the bond, she is still unsure of her own feelings and whether she truly loves him. Despite her confusion, she vows to do her absolute best to protect herself and avoid causing him pain by letting others touch her. Yui stands resolute yet vulnerable, admitting that while love is still a mystery to her, she is determined to try for the sake of their connection. Yui asks him to wait until she can fully understand her feelings, acknowledging the deep bond that connects her to Celeste. He assures her that a dragon's long life allows him to wait for years, wishing to love her for who she is rather than just their destined connection. Smiling gently, Yui takes his hand and admits that she also wants to get to know him properly as a person. They share a warm embrace, comforting each other with the assurance that they have plenty of time to grow together. Later, Yui and DC sit together for a peaceful study session in a sunlit room while Celine reads nearby. The mood is cheerful as they chat about Celine's skilled cooking and the delicious sweets Celeste had provided for them. Celine continues to read elegantly while DC admits that studying is difficult, though she remains engaged. DC reflects that in her small human village before she was enslaved, almost no one knew how to read or write except the chief. She realizes that neither staying in that village nor remaining a slave would have ever given her the chance to learn these things. A bright smile lights up her face as she declares that this path has ultimately led her to a place of happiness. She expresses a hopeful wish to keep studying with her friends once she fully regains her health. Yui places her hand gently over DC's, offering a silent gesture of support and shared affection. Yui beams at her friend, agreeing that she too finds great joy in these quiet moments of studying alongside DC. Celeste smiles gently down at the girl, suggesting they go out to buy some new clothes for her. Walking through the bustling streets, Celeste brushes off Yui's worries about money, insisting they need more than what is currently at home. The pair arrives at a charming boutique, its windows displaying fine garments that promise warmth and elegance. Celeste steps inside with purpose, announcing to the staff that he has come to purchase a wardrobe for the child. A beastfolk clerk greets them warmly, guiding Yui toward the fitting room while asking about her preferred colors and styles. The curtain swooshes shut, separating the small girl from her guardian as the preparations for the fashion show begin. Celeste examines a high-quality cape made of snow spider threads, considering it for Yui's daily use. A flashback explains that these expensive garments are traditionally given to children as coming-of-age gifts to ensure comfort year-round. Inside the booth, Yui trembles with fear at disrobing, but Celeste reassures her that the clerk is simply there to help. The clerks chat idly while waiting, speculating on the relationship between the long-lived dragonkin and the young human child. The curtain draws back to reveal Yui transformed, wearing a frilly dress and hat that frames her delicate features perfectly. Yui tugs nervously at the brim of her hat, asking if she looks weird, but Celeste is captivated and tells her she looks amazing. She spins in a second outfit, a lighter dress, as Celeste checks to ensure it doesn't hinder her movement. With a satisfied smile, Celeste stuns the staff by declaring he will buy absolutely everything she is currently wearing. Not content with just 2 outfits, He kneels and eagerly asks if she would like to try on even more clothes. The clerks enthusiastically bring out women's pants, suggesting the trendy style might suit her well. Yui shakes her head and points to a skirt, asserting her own preference for the first time in the shopping trip. Celeste commands the staff to match shoes and accessories to the outfits, telling Yui they will buy anything she likes. Watching her try on clothes with such innocence, a soft and melancholic expression crosses Celeste's face. He finally understands why his dragon father constantly showered his mother with gifts, realizing the motivation behind the behavior. It wasn't just obligation, but a pure and overwhelming feeling of happiness derived from seeing a loved one shine. The shopping spree concludes with a massive pile of purchases as Celeste orders everything except her current outfit sent to his home. He looks at Yui with genuine affection, smiling warmly as he tells her she is truly adorable. Yui stands frozen in shock, her cheeks flushing as the direct compliment sinks into her heart. Celeste takes her hands and asks if she is enjoying herself, his heart skipping a beat as he wonders if he just saw a smile. Yui lifts the hem of her skirt in a polite curtsy, smiling softly as she thanks him for his immense kindness. Night falls as they walk home, the dragonkin smiling to himself while the small girl clutches his hand tightly. Back in the safety of their home, Celeste relaxes in his chair while Yui unpacks her treasures, glad the female clerk made her feel safe. He smiles with satisfaction, happy that he was able to figure out exactly what kind of clothes Yui likes best. Yui sits on the rug and looks up at him, quietly asking if she can know more about him and his family. Celeste lifts Yui into his lap, revealing that he has a father, a mother, and twin brothers. He explains that his parents left Grandsir to travel after he came of age, and though he hasn't known their location for decades, he believes his brothers became knights in the capital. Seeing Yui's worry, he clarifies that his mother is an elf and his father a dragon, so their long lifespans make decades of silence essentially meaningless to them. Yui stares up at him with curiosity, asking if his mixed parentage makes him a half-and-half hybrid. She tries to visualize the genetics, wondering if he is physically comprised of half of each race. Celeste corrects her misconception, stating that children of different races are born as one distinct species or the other, revealing that he is a dragon while his brothers are elves. Yui's eyes sparkle with interest as she asks him to describe what his brothers are actually like. He notes that elven twins are incredibly rare, and at 170 years old, they are merely a bit older than Yui by their standards. Celeste recalls with a sigh how they used wind magic to cause chaos, often prank braiding his hair while he slept. He chuckles softly, admitting that braiding his hair has now become an unbreakable habit, only to realize Yui has drifted off to sleep against his chest. The young girl slumbers deeply, her head resting peacefully against him as the conversation fades into silence. Watching her rest, he muses that children who sleep well grow well, wondering if the endless wardrobe changes exhausted her. He silently urges her to eat, play, and sleep so she can grow healthy and strong. A shadow of melancholy touches his thoughts as he realizes she will mature quickly and may one day fall in love with someone else, leaving his side. He silently pleads for her to grow slowly, promising to buy her new clothes for every season while dreading the day she might leave. Celeste sits alone in the quiet room, gently rocking the sleeping girl in his arms as night falls. Elsewhere, the maids marvel at the mountain of clothes Celeste purchased, noting that he seems completely unable to resist Yui's cuteness. Boxes of finery lie open, revealing delicate floral hair accessories and pristine shoes meant for his young ward. A maid stares silently at the extravagant pile of gifts, her expression unreadable as she surveys the scene. Adelaide reflects on the moment Celeste found his mate, describing the revelation as a crushing death sentence that shattered her world. She recalls falling hopelessly in love with him, captivated by the mesmerizing contrast of his bright blue hair and piercing golden eyes. In her eyes, Celeste stood far above all other dragons in beauty and elegance, a being of pure perfection that stole her heart. She looks back with disdain at the ordinary men of the city, dismissing them as cheap, broken toys compared to his magnificence. Despair consumed her when she realized she wasn't his soulmate, knowing that a dragon recognizes their destined partner instantly. A dark wish took root in her heart, hoping he would never find his soulmate as long as she was alive to love him. Memories of her failed attempts to woo him with cute aprons flash by, emphasizing his complete indifference to her efforts. She stares at the frail, unsmiling child in Celeste's arms, her mind screaming in jealous agony asking why fate chose this girl instead of her. A sharp voice snaps Adelaide out of her dark reverie, pulling her back to the reality of her duties as a maid. The head maid orders her to prepare tea for Lady Yui after the meal, and Adelaide forces herself to comply with a stammered agreement. Adelaide sets the cup down before Yui with a cold professionalism, watching as the young girl quietly murmurs her thanks. Disappointment colors Adelaide's thoughts as she notes the cup contains only warm milk, dismissing it as not even being real tea. Yui takes a sip and praises the delicious taste, completely unaware of the maid's icy, resentful gaze lingering on her. Celeste interrupts the morning routine, gently informing Yui that lessons are cancelled because they must leave immediately. He explains that the guard squad needs to interview her about the incident at the slave betting arena, warning her it might be difficult. Yui anxiously asks if DC will be there, but Celeste assures her that he will stay by her side so she has no need to fear. A gentle smile graces Celeste's face as he comforts her, his presence acting as a shield against her rising anxiety. They arrive at the imposing headquarters, and Celeste praises Yui's strength for facing the trauma of her past. Sunlight floods the room as they enter the office, where Celeste politely greets the waiting officials. Two beastfolk investigators welcome them with friendly smiles, asking for their full cooperation in the day's inquiry. Celeste appreciates the presence of female officers, noting that Yui might still be terrified of speaking with strange men. A familiar figure steps forward with a sheepish grin, introducing himself as the man Yui kicked beneath the arena. A vivid flashback strikes Yui, the memory of her foot connecting with his face playing out in sharp, violent detail. The man laughs off the past violence, apologizing profusely for scaring her back then instead of holding a grudge. Celeste takes Yui's hand and leads her deeper into the facility, the atmosphere growing heavier with every step. They walk past a row of holding cells, the dark corridor filled with the tension of imprisoned criminals. A tiger beastman roars in fury from behind bars, his eyes bulging as he screams the word, soulmate, at the terrifying number 8. The investigator panics at the sudden outburst, confused because the prisoner's interrogation wasn't scheduled until later. The beastman lunges against his chains with insane strength, blaming Yui for his downfall as he reaches through the bars. Yui freezes in absolute terror, the sheer malice of the beastman's glare paralyzing her as the trauma of the arena returns. Yui freezes in terror as the sudden eruption of violence shatters the peace around her. Celeste immediately pulls her close, shielding her body with his own as his expression hardens. A deadly shard of ice hovers inches from the intruder's eye, halting the beastman in his tracks. Celeste snaps his fingers with lethal intent, summoning jagged crystals to surround their attacker. He stands as an immovable barrier between the girl and the assassin, aiming the magic directly at the threat. The dragon's gaze pierces through the ice, his cold fury evident as he stares down the intruder. Terrified by the overwhelming power, the assassin stammers in horror as he recognizes the blue dragon. Celeste remains silent and imposing, letting his reputation and magical prowess speak for him. Realizing he is outmatched, the beastman drops his weapon and scrambles to flee the scene. He crashes through a glass window in a desperate escape while guards shout to surround the area immediately. Celeste turns his attention to Yui, asking if she can stand while ordering a messenger to be sent at once. Overcome with shock, Yui collapses on the floor and sobs out a broken apology through her tears. Celeste reflects that this girl, who previously stood brave against others, has been shaken to her core. He scoops her up into a protective embrace, holding her tightly to quell her trembling. While stroking her hair to soothe her, his eyes burn with a sharp, dangerous intensity. Elsewhere, a maid grumbles to herself as she hauls a heavy basket of laundry out to the garden. She complains bitterly about the indignity of having to wash Yui's clothes alongside the master's. Her demeanor shifts to obsession as she buries her face in Celeste's shirt, blushing at its size. A voice suddenly calls out from the shadows, causing her to freeze in surprise. A mysterious figure confronts her, accusing the maid of carrying the distinct scent of number 8. A hateful internal voice sneers at the sight of the flax-haired child, dismissing number 8 as nothing more than a skinny human brat. Recognition dawns on Adelaide's face as she stares at the girl, realizing with shock that this is the very same child from her memories. A violent flashback erupts as she recalls the chaos of the slave arena, the memory of a sudden, impactful kick replaying in her mind. In the past, Adelaide watches the blue dragonkin take the child, realizing with dread that they have stumbled upon his lair. Desperate and trembling, she pleads with the beastman that the slave number 8 defies her master and requires thorough re-education. Tears well in Adelaide's eyes as she stands before the beastman, her face twisted with a mixture of fear and vindictive resolve. The massive tiger beastman crouches low, fixing her with an intense gaze as he asks if she truly wants to possess that child. She bargains for her life, demanding he swear to protect both her and her mother from the wrath of the powerful blue dragonkin. The beastman blinks slowly before his expression twists into a terrifying, predatory grin at the prospect of the deal. He declares that the human child is worth money, deciding that as long as they secure the brat, the adults are completely expendable. His focus narrows with lethal intent as he fixates specifically on capturing the one known as Number 8. Back in the present, Celeste enters the safety of his home, cradling the exhausted and sleeping Yui protectively in his arms. He quietly informs Celine that there was trouble with the guards, prompting the worried maid to ask if Lady Yui is all right. Celeste gently wakes the girl, asking softly if she feels well enough to eat dinner after the day's ordeal. Celine dismisses herself for the night to give them space, while Celeste decides to wait until he has calmed down before eating. In the hallway, Celine urges her daughter Adelaide to leave the master and the child alone so they can go home. She promises to leave the food ready for warming later, maintaining her professional duty despite the heavy atmosphere. Celine checks the locks with paranoia, asking Adelaide to confirm that the back door is properly secured against intruders. Adelaide stands silently in the shadows, her eyes hidden as she stares blankly ahead with a dark secret in her heart. A hand silently turns the lock, the click of the mechanism betraying the safety of the house as the door is quietly unlatched. Celeste smiles warmly at Yui, telling her he will be right back after putting away his coat while she enjoys her tea. Yui sits alone at the large dining table, sipping her drink while the dark, open doorway looms ominously behind her. A sudden presence catches her attention, causing her to turn her head as she wonders if Celeste is already returning. The door creaks open with a chilling sound, revealing a shadow stretching across the floor as Yui stares in confusion. Terror strikes as the massive tiger beastman lunges from the darkness, his giant claws descending upon the helpless girl. In the coat room, a sudden realization freezes Celeste in his tracks as he questions why the fugitive beastman hasn't been caught yet. The guard's warning echoes in his mind, revealing the enemy is a cat tribe beastman who is a master of hiding his presence and tracks. Panic explodes in Celeste's chest as he pieces the danger together, spinning around to rush back to the dining room. He bursts onto the balcony screaming Yui's name, his face contorted with pure terror as he searches for her. To his horror, he looks down to see the beastman leaping out the window, carrying the captured Yui away into the night. The beastman marvels that his presence was detected without a sound, clicking his tongue in irritation as he makes his move. Moving with terrifying speed, he snatches Yui from the floor before Celeste can react, securing his hostage in an instant. The intruder grips the terrified girl tightly, his claws digging in as he glares at the dragon with a predator's grin. Overwhelmed by fear, Yui loses control of her bladder, trembling as liquid drips to the floor under Celeste's shocked gaze. He mocks Number 8 for finally acting like a normal kid, recalling how she used to be expressionless no matter how much he beat her. Pure rage ignites in Celeste's eyes, and deadly magic gathers around him as he prepares to strike the abuser down. He unleashes a storm of ice but is forced to freeze his attack instantly when the beastman uses Yui as a shield and screams for him to stop. The beastman taunts the pisspants brat, and confirms his suspicion that the girl is indeed the dragon's destined mate. Celeste's expression turns frigid as he repeats the intruder's words, realizing his secret has been leaked. The intruder sneers that his group isn't stupid enough to engage a powerful dragonkin in a direct confrontation. He gloats that they know a dragon's weakness, fully aware that to their kind, a mate means absolutely everything. He declares that a dragon cannot defy nature to protect their partner, using this biological imperative to bind Celeste's hands. Leveraging this advantage, he commands Celeste to lower his arms, remain motionless, and forbids any chanting of spells. He threatens to slice Yui's belly open at the slightest sign of resistance, pressing his sharp claws against her fragile form. Left with no choice, Celeste dispels his magic and stands helplessly as the crystals shatter around him, surrendering to ensure Yui's safety. The beastman snarls a deadly ultimatum, threatening to rip Yui's stomach open if Celeste dares to move even a muscle. Tears stream down Yui's face as she trembles in the monster's grasp, paralyzed by fear and the sharp claws at her throat. Celeste obeys instantly, standing motionless with a chillingly calm expression while his golden eyes burn with suppressed rage. A heavy fist slams into Celeste's face, snapping his head back as he refuses to defend himself for Yui's sake. The beastman sneers, admitting he underestimated the rumors that dragonkin are fatally weak when it comes to their mates. He slams Celeste against the wall, gloating that he will crush the dragon's skull to ensure he can never chase them again. Yui watches in horror, the brutal scene of violence overlapping with the traumatic memories of her past abuse. Flashbacks flood her mind, the voice of her former master commanding her to submit and never defy him. She recalls that absolute obedience was her only reality, forced to stay silent even when friends were beaten beside her. The trauma runs so deep that she remembers being unable to even cry, her emotions hollowed out by despair. A spark of life returns to her dull eyes as the reality of Celeste's sacrifice begins to pierce through her conditioning. She sees Celeste taking the beating without resistance, his gaze focused solely on her safety despite the violence. The Beastman pauses, startled by a sudden shift in the atmosphere as Yui's trembling ceases. A fierce internal battle rages within her as she screams at her terrified instincts to stop running and fight. The Beastman prepares a finishing blow, but Yui locks eyes with Celeste and realizes the depth of his devotion. The realization that he is getting hurt solely to protect her shatters her paralysis and ignites a primal fury. With a burst of desperate courage, Yui launches herself at the Beastman, tackling him with every ounce of her strength. The impact knocks them off balance, the shock of the small girl's attack momentarily stunning the massive captor. The Beastman roars in fury, cursing the little shit, as they tumble out of the broken window. They crash onto the ground below, Yui clinging to him with a death grip that defies her small stature. The elf investigator arrives just in time to witness the chaotic scene unfolding on the lawn. Yui straddles the Beastman, her hands locked around his throat in a desperate attempt to choke him out. The Beastman groans in pain, struggling to dislodge the small girl who is fighting with the ferocity of a wild animal. He mocks her stick-thin arms, but panic sets in as he realizes he cannot break her adrenaline-fueled grip. Cursing violently, he tries to pry her off, shocked by the sheer tenacity of the child he thought was weak. Celeste looms over them, his heart breaking at the sight of his gentle mate forced to resort to such violence. He steps onto the Beastman's chest, declaring that he has held back long enough and will now return the suffering tenfold. The Beastman gasps as Celeste's magic flares, the dragon's true power finally unleashed in defense of his mate. Ice crystals rapidly encase the Beastman, his body freezing over as Celeste's cold rage manifests physically. The enemy looks on in terror as his hand turns to solid ice, the battle ending instantly under the Dragonkin's overwhelming power. The Beastman gasps in shock as jagged crystals of ice erupt from the ground, instantly encasing him in a frozen prison. A single word of command falls from Celeste's lips, sealing the assassin's movements with absolute finality. Celeste stands amidst the shattered remnants of the attack, clutching Yui fiercely while the intruder lies immobilized before them. Safe in his arms, Yui buries her face in his shirt and sobs, the terror of the moment finally overtaking her adrenaline. A familiar voice calls out from the courtyard, and Yui looks up to see Seth arriving just as the danger has passed. Seth rides in swiftly on horseback, accompanied by a security squad that immediately secures the perimeter. He approaches with a calm demeanor, noting that the massive discharge of magic served as a perfect beacon to guide them to the location. Celeste confirms the situation and orders a carriage for the prisoner, still refusing to let go of the trembling girl. Glancing at the frozen captive, Celeste asks if the severed arm can be reattached, offering a quiet apology for his near-lethal loss of control. Seth dismisses the apology, stating that such a ruthless response is only natural when a child is threatened, and promises to handle the medical treatment. Celeste gently strokes Yui's head, vowing that he will never let that man near her again while apologizing for frightening her with his rage. Wiping her tears, Yui looks up with unexpected determination, declaring that next time she will fight instead of just being protected. Her fierce resolve catches Celeste off guard, and he gazes at her with a mixture of surprise and deep emotion. Her voice softens as she clings to him, whispering a heartfelt gratitude for saving her life once more. Yui suddenly notices the blood dripping from his arm and panics, but Celeste calmly assures her that he is fine. A soft glow envelopes his injury as he casts a healing spell, knitting the wound closed before her wide, amazed eyes. He offers a gentle smile to the relieved girl, reminding her that despite his appearance, he is still a qualified healer for the security squad. Seth wonders aloud how the assassin knew to target this specific house, calling it a death wish to break into a Dragonkin's home while Yui checks Celeste for bumps. Celeste's gaze drifts toward the open door, his expression darkening as he contemplates the breach in their sanctuary. Seth suddenly pauses near the entrance, sniffing the air with a sharp, suspicious intensity that draws Celeste's attention. When asked if something is wrong, Seth denies it with a tight expression, though his gaze lingers darkly on the maid entering the room. A battered young woman lies motionless on the ground with a collar around her neck, her vacant gaze hinting at the brutal struggle that left her in the dust. The scene shifts to a shattered window where the terrifying realization sets in that a slave trader has specifically targeted Lady Yui. Maids weep with relief while embracing the survivors, exclaiming how terrible the attack was but thanking the heavens that both are safe. The master issues swift orders for Celine to secure the house and find someone to repair the broken window before he departs. A dark suspicion takes root as he recalls the Beastman explicitly stating he would not lay a hand on Lord Celeste. The inconsistency gnaws at her, leaving her shocked and demanding to know why the attackers behaved that way. Resentment flares as she questions the fairness of it all, asking bitterly why it is always her who gets protected. A young girl with a short bob glances back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable but steeling herself for the trials ahead. Memories flash of her courage as she reminds herself that it is okay because she has even stood up to her master in the past. She bolsters her confidence by asserting she is stronger than Adelaide, preparing to face the threat head-on. Chaos erupts as the estate is engulfed in flames, the night torn apart by a violent raid from ruthless beastmen. The invaders shout orders to capture fertile women and children while mercilessly slaughtering the men and the elderly to prevent any escape. Panic grips the sister as she screams for her little brother to hide, desperate to shield him from the encroaching horror. Adrenaline surging, she swings a makeshift weapon at the massive beastman, throwing her entire weight into a desperate strike. The beastman easily catches her, mocking her liveliness before driving a blade into her in a ruthless display of dominance. She is thrown to the ground but scrambles back up, refusing to stay down despite the overwhelming difference in power. Her captor grins, noting that for a kid she moves well and could be trained into a valuable combat slave. She screams at them to keep away from her brother, fighting with every ounce of strength as he cries out for her. The slaver praises her spirit for the market but cruelly dismisses the crying boy as useless and merely for exchange. Terror breaks her defiance as she begs them to stop, haunted by the beastman's remark that her brother might make a good toy. Sobbing in defeat, she promises to behave and do anything if they just let her stay with her little brother. Years later in a dungeon, a guard taunts her battered form, asking where all that fire and fight she used to have has gone. He crushes her under his boot, reminding her that she only fought when facing death and the situation now is exactly the same. A singular terrifying clarity pierces her mind as she realizes that dying here means the end of everything. She erupts with a scream and strikes back, fueled by the devastating knowledge that she will never see him again if she falls. Gamblers in the arena buzz with excitement, whispering that this suspicious newcomer might actually be able to challenge number 8. The crowd roars with laughter and places bets on the house fighter, a slave trained from birth to kill known only as number 8. The protagonist faces her opponent in the sand, a small child holding a blade who looks eerily out of place in the death pit. She falters as she looks at the tiny girl, her resolve shaking as the image of her little brother overlaps with her enemy. Caught in a lethal dilemma, she realizes she might die if she loses, but winning gives her a chance to avoid killing the child. A young girl lies on the cold floor of a cell, wiping tears from her face while the iron collar of a slave weighs heavily on her neck. She looks down with concern at a battered younger child, asking gently if the little one is okay. The small girl nods silently, and the older one confirms that she can at least understand spoken words. Pointing to the mark on the child's collar, she identifies the new arrival as number 8. She cheerfully proposes they become friends and introduces herself as the big sister, asking the little one's age. Pointing to herself, she states that her designation is number 17. The younger girl struggles to pronounce the long word, stuttering through the syllables with great difficulty. Giving up on the full number, she simply shortens it and calls her new friend DC. In the present, DC wakes up in a carriage as they approach the second guard unit, realizing she had dozed off. She apologizes for falling asleep and asks Yui if she is truly okay with continuing to use that nickname. DC reflects that Yui must have had a real name before being enslaved, unlike those born in the gambling den. She admits that hearing her old name only brings back painful memories of her lost family and village. She resolves to leave that pain behind and live her new life happily as DC by Yui's side. Celeste gently pats her head and calls her admirable, while Yui runs toward them with a bright smile. Yui beams with pure affection, calling out a cheerful good morning to her dearest friend. Relieved to be reunited and safe, Yui tackles DC in a warm hug while the group celebrates being together. A cryptic and somber warning lingers on the page, speaking of a lonely night that must never return. An elf woman cheerfully announces the beginning of a math lesson, holding a large basket overflowing with fresh apples. She asks the children if they have any prior experience with math, to which DC mentions counting cows while Yui denies it. The teacher places a single apple in front of each girl to begin the lesson with a clear visual example. DC passes her apple to Yui, and the teacher asks Yui to calculate how many she holds now that she has received another. Yui correctly answers 2, and the teacher smiles while identifying this process as simple addition. The instructor complicates the task by mixing 3 apples and 4 oranges, but Yui instantly calculates the total is 7. Raising the stakes, the teacher suggests a larger combination of 7 apples and 6 oranges, yet Yui answers 13 without a second's pause. The teacher throws a rapid string of numbers at her to test her limits, and Yui's immediate answer of 25 leaves the woman stunned. Yui realizes she must perform these calculations mentally to hide her past knowledge, leaving DC amazed by her apparent genius. The teacher surmises that Yui understands the decimal system, assuming she learned it from counting people in the slave quarters. Impressed by her skill, the teacher decides to offer a reward and asks Yui to extend her hand. A wrapped piece of hard candy drops into the girl's palm with a quiet clink. The teacher promises DC a treat if she succeeds next, while Yui quietly secures her prize. Yui declares she will give the candy to Celeste because he works hard, prioritizing her brother over her own desire. A soft smile touches the teacher's face as she acknowledges the girl's thoughtful nature with a gentle look. Switching to subtraction, the teacher outlines a scenario where DC shares her 15 apples and asks for the remainder. DC eagerly raises her hand and correctly shouts that 9 apples would be left. The teacher confirms the answer is correct, and DC excitedly vows to save her sweet treat for later. With the basics successfully covered, the instructor announces that they will now move on to multiplication. She arranges pairs of oranges to demonstrate the concept, leaving DC confused by the unfamiliar term. Yui instantly recognizes the grouping and answers 4, prompting the teacher to explain it as times tables. The lesson triggers a nostalgic memory of Yui's parents teaching her math with candy during a childhood hospital stay. The teacher challenges them with 6 groups of 6, and DC struggles to write the problem down while Yui thinks. Yui solves it instantly, but the teacher presses on, asking if she already knows the answer before the question is fully settled. She leans in close to whisper another question about 3 times 6, testing the limits of the child's processing speed. The teacher falls silent, her expression shifting to one of sheer disbelief as she processes the girl's capabilities. Yui fires back correct answers of 36 and 40 as the teacher rapidly increases the difficulty to probe her limits. When asked for 12 groups of 5, Yui answers 60 without hesitation, proving her calculation skills are far beyond normal. The teacher finally breaks composure, demanding to know how Yui can calculate such complex numbers so quickly. Yui and DC sit side by side in the sunlit study room, their quills scratching diligently against the parchment while Celine watches over them. Yui focuses intensely on her work, filling a grid with numbers at a speed that draws Celine's curious gaze. Celine lifts the paper and stares at the contents, realizing with shock that the child has written a complete multiplication table. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she processes the complex grid, stunned that a child could produce such a document from memory. She asks if Yui memorized the entire chart, breathless with amazement at the intellectual feat before her. Unable to contain her delight, Celine pulls Yui into a crushing hug, shouting that she is absolutely amazing. Yui blinks in wide-eyed confusion, puzzled by the overwhelming praise for something she considers basic knowledge. DC eagerly demands the paper, realizing that this cheat sheet will revolutionize how they teach math to the new recruits. Celine rubs Yui's head vigorously, declaring her a genius and noting that even adults in this world cannot calculate so effortlessly. When asked where she learned this, Yui awkwardly recalls her previous life, where such knowledge was standard for little kids. Celine explains that education is a luxury usually reserved for nobles, while commoners only learn if their trade absolutely demands it. She sighs that while survival forces most families to put children to work, she dreams of a world where everyone can read and calculate. DC looks down at her hands, realizing that if she had stayed in her village, she would have lived her whole life in ignorance. Yui reflects on the maid's daily question about her outfit, a stark reminder of the luxurious bubble she now lives in. She lists her blessings, a warm room, clean clothes, and education, realizing she has been given a life free from the burden of labor. Guilt pricks at her as she remembers her past life, where she died young and drained her parents' savings without ever working to repay them. Celine interrupts her thoughts to praise her division skills, noting that Yui's math is far superior to her reading ability. She playfully suggests that with such talent, they should hire Yui to handle the paperwork in the second guard unit's office. The word work strikes Yui like a lightning bolt, sparking a sudden, fierce realization. She leans forward with burning intensity, startling Celine as she vehemently declares her intention to do office work. Celine laughs at the sudden outburst, agreeing that it would be wonderful once Yui masters reading and writing to match her math. While Celine pets her head affectionately, Yui remains serious, her mind locking onto this new goal with unwavering focus. Yui sits tall with a determined gaze, thrilling at the discovery of a job she can finally do to prove her worth. Celeste supervises Yui in a shop as she carefully inspects a leather satchel with focused curiosity. He reminds her gently that while dedication to training is admirable, she must be careful not to overdo it now that she has recovered. The scene shifts with a rhythmic click of dress shoes against the floor as they arrive at their destination. Entering the mess hall, Celeste calls out to Yui, who is already standing in the center of the room surrounded by curious beastfolk. Yui stands amidst the crowd, clutching a piece of paper with numbers scrawled across it while looking slightly overwhelmed. The elf teacher steps in to manage the crowd, announcing it is Yui's turn with Celeste and thanking him for his hard work. Confused by the sudden attention focused on his ward, Celeste asks what the fuss is about while the teacher urges him to take a closer look. He looks down to see a handwritten grid filled with numbers, a multiplication chart painstakingly drawn out by the child. The teacher explains that Yui invented this chart to help people calculate without adding manually, revealing it as the solution to the multiplication problems. As Yui hides her shy face behind the paper, the teacher marvels that Yui is a math genius despite only learning the basics that very day. Celeste stares at the chart and then at Yui, a look of profound realization and pride dawning on his face as he processes her achievement. He kneels to her level, gently patting her head while telling her that she possesses an incredible talent that not just anyone can match. Yui stammers, her face flushed as she struggles to articulate the thoughts racing through her mind under his praise. She clutches the paper tightly to her chest, gathering her courage to speak her true desire to the one person who matters most. With determination, she declares that when she grows up, she wants to become an office worker. The teacher clarifies that Yui specifically wants to work as a staff member in the second guard unit alongside Celeste, leaving him stunned. Yui reinforces her wish, stating that since Lord Celeste works there, she wants to work there too. She expresses her simple, heartfelt wish to be where he is and to stay together with him always. Overcome with emotion, Celeste pulls the small girl into a tight embrace right in the middle of the bustling room. He marvels internally that this small girl, recently freed from slavery, is already choosing her own path and walking beside him. Breaking the hug, he warmly agrees to her plan, promising that they will work, eat, and go home together in the future. Tears prick Yui's eyes as she smiles purely, whispering a soft affirmation to his promise. She suddenly thanks him for his hard work, shifting the focus back to her gratitude for him. Yui places the candy reward into his hand, and the teacher explains that Yui insisted on giving her prize to him instead of eating it. The teacher remarks that Yui's deep kindness is just another one of her many talents as Celeste accepts the gift with a moved expression. DC watches from a nearby table, smiling as she observes the tender moment between her sister and her guardian. She reflects on how far Yui has come, recalling that just 2 years ago, the traumatized girl knew no words other than yes. Memories surface of Yui's birth in a gambling den, where she was treated even worse than DC and left covered in wounds. DC realizes that she was only able to endure that hell and be a big sister because Yui was there surviving with her. Now free from that darkness, she smiles knowing Yui has discovered her talent and found her true pair in Celeste. DC reflects that Yui has finally found the one special person she can truly be happy with in this life. She smiles with genuine warmth, deciding that Yui's happiness is her own while hoping to find her own special purpose someday. Celine rewards her diligence with a small treat, praising DC for completing another day of excellent work. Beaming with enthusiasm, the young girl eagerly asks what subject they will tackle in tomorrow's lesson. Celine suggests learning about money for shopping, causing DC's eyes to light up at the dream of buying things with Yui. DC vows to study harder and learn everything she can, determined to be a reliable big sister who can lead the way. She silently holds onto a secret hope that one day she might be able to meet a certain person from her past again. Celeste and Yui return to the mansion, where they are informed that Adelaide is currently busy tidying up the room. Yui peeks through a doorway to find Adelaide holding a dress against her body, lost in a fantasy as she poses before the mirror. The maid flinches when she notices the child watching her, sweating nervously as she stammers out a stiff welcome. Adelaide hurriedly excuses herself and brushes past Yui to escape the room, leaving the air thick with awkward tension. Yui opens the closet door and peers inside, her expression serious as she contemplates the maid's strange behavior. Celeste slides open a drawer to reveal a frilly dress while Yui watches his every move with anxious eyes. He inspects the contents with a critical eye, noting that nothing seems amiss within the storage boxes. Turning to the girl, he expresses pride in her career goals but gently questions if she feels pressured to work so hard. Yui lowers her gaze, muttering that the new furniture and room make her feel like a costly burden. Celeste rejects her reasoning instantly, insisting that he provided the room simply because he desired to do so. He clarifies that the government covers her expenses, so every coin she earns is hers to spend freely. When he asks about a matching ribbon, Yui freezes as she realizes the accessory is missing. He suggests it might be on a high shelf and cheerfully invites her to hunt for it together. They stand ready to search, the looming figure of the master towering protectively over the small girl. Yui suddenly scrambles onto the bed, frantically smoothing the sheets to hide her nervousness. She presents the made bed with a proud declaration that it is all clean. Celeste smiles and pats her head, praising her diligence in handling her own chores. His mind races as he realizes he rarely enters her room, noting that cleaning is actually Adelaide's responsibility. A sharp glint catches his eye on a high shelf, signaling a discrepancy that demands attention. He masks his suspicion with a bright smile, suggesting they check the wardrobe next. They comb through the closet, opening boxes and drawers in a rhythmic search for the lost item. His focus narrows on a stack of containers, sensing a deliberate irregularity in their arrangement. Tucked away in a dark top corner sits a small box, hidden perfectly from a child's line of sight. He instructs Yui to wait, his expression darkening as he realizes the concealment was intentional. Alone with the evidence, he stares at the black box with a cold, calculating gaze. He flips the lid open to reveal the stolen treasure resting against the velvet lining. A pearl pin lies inside, confirming his worst suspicions about the thief in their midst. Bringing it close, he identifies the lingering scent of Adelaide on the stolen jewelry. He grapples with the betrayal, noting that while her family is loyal, she has only served them for 2 years. A heavy question forms as he considers dealing with the thief without traumatizing Yui further. Yui sits despondent on the bed, her face shadowed by a guilt that isn't hers to bear. Her hands tremble in her lap as Celeste watches her, realizing the depth of her silent suffering. He voices the hard truth, telling her plainly that he believes Adelaide has been stealing from her. Yui admits she saw the maid trying on her clothes in the mirror but forced herself to believe it was a mistake. She apologizes through tears for her silence, but Celeste holds her gaze and insists the fault lies with the thief. Celeste informs the maid that they need to tell Celine about a serious matter regarding the household. He reveals that accessories have vanished from the wardrobe, causing Celine to recoil in denial as she refuses to believe her child is a thief. As Celeste notes that Adelaide has neglected her cleaning duties, Celine recalls seeing a red coral flower ornament that she hadn't recognized. Overwhelmed by the sudden realization, Celine staggers back in shock and crashes into the serving cart with a gasp of distress. She collapses to the floor, explaining that Adelaide claimed to have saved money to buy the item, and apologizes profusely for the deception. Celeste acknowledges the difficulty of the situation but orders Celine to quietly inspect Adelaide's belongings without alerting her. Steeling her resolve, Celine agrees to conduct the search that night, declaring that as a mother, she cannot overlook her daughter's potential crime. She composes herself to apologize to Yui for her daughter's actions, prompting the young girl to ask if Celine herself is okay. Alone with Yui, Celeste sighs deeply, admitting that despite his long life, he still struggles to find the right answers in such painful moments. He gazes at Yui, noting her eyes resemble black tea, and imagines how beautiful the stolen red coral hairpin would have looked on her. Gently touching her face, Celeste asks Yui directly if she wishes to take back what was stolen from her. Yui admits she wants it back, confessing that the item holds special meaning because it was the first thing ever bought specifically for her. She hesitantly asks if it would be acceptable for someone to simply return it to her, hoping to resolve the issue without conflict. Struggling with her feelings, Yui acknowledges Adelaide's fault but tells Celeste she does not want Celine to suffer for it. Celeste realizes his protective instinct stems from his affection for Yui's hard work and honesty, tempting him to keep the theft a secret to spare her pain. Moved by her overwhelming kindness, he pauses to consider the weight of her compassion. Ultimately, he rejects the idea of secrecy, deciding they must settle the matter properly to truly honor and treasure Yui's heart. Later that night, Celine anxiously rummages through Adelaide's wardrobe, praying it was all a mistake as she initially finds nothing. A sharp sound echoes in the quiet room as she uncovers a hidden compartment within the furniture. The open drawer reveals a dazzling stash of stolen treasures, including the red flower and ribbons that Yui had lost. Celine collapses onto the floor in utter devastation, letting out a shattered cry as the undeniable truth lies before her. Adelaide pauses at the window, hearing her name called with a tone that suggests a conversation she isn't ready for. Celeste asks her to come to the living room on the first floor to talk, leaving her confused and questioning the unusual directness. She walks down the hallway, puzzled because the master usually relays his business through her mother rather than speaking to her directly. Entering the drawing room, she finds a tense gathering with the master, the young girl, and the head maid all waiting in silence. Her eyes widen as she spots her mother standing there, the gravity of the situation beginning to settle in her chest. Celeste breaks the heavy silence, instructing both her and the others to take a seat so they can begin. Adelaide notices with a start that he hasn't even changed out of his uniform, indicating this meeting was his immediate priority. He cuts straight to the chase, staring her down and asking if she has something she wants to confess to him. Panic flickers in her eyes as she feigns ignorance, stuttering out a weak question about what he could possibly mean. His expression hardens as he admits he had hoped she would come forward herself, but realizes that expectation was in vain. A terrifying chill radiates from him as his gaze turns icy, shocking her with the sheer intensity of his disappointment. Yui watches from the sofa, trembling at the sight of his beautiful face devoid of any warmth or emotion. He drops the hammer, accusing her directly of stealing personal belongings from Yui and demanding the truth. The head maid gasps in horror at her daughter's name while Adelaide freezes, the weight of the accusation crushing the air. He questions why she would steal things she could easily afford, dismissing her silence before moving to the verdict. The head maid looks on in disbelief as Celeste delivers the final blow, stating calmly that Adelaide must quit her job immediately. Her mother seizes her by the shoulders, shaking her violently and screaming that she has committed a crime against the house. Adelaide collapses under the pressure, sobbing that she has loved the master for years and her feelings drove her to it. She screams in anguish, demanding to know why this girl was chosen over her after all her years of devotion. Her jealousy pours out as she insults Yui's silence and status, unable to accept that the child is Celeste's destined mate. Her mother tries to hush her, but the dam has broken and the torrent of resentment cannot be stopped. She confesses her desperate desire to be the one standing by his side, wearing the beautiful clothes and ornaments he gifts. Burying her face in her hands, she weeps bitterly, asking if the only reason Yui wins is simply because of the mate bond. A heavy silence descends on the room as her sobs echo, the raw emotion hanging thick in the air between them. Yui speaks up softly, admitting that she doesn't understand the bond either and often questions it herself. She lists her own insecurities, wondering why a sickly human child was paired with a powerful, long-lived dragonkin. The question of why me lingers as she questions the logic of being the mate to someone as incredible as Celeste. Celeste listens with a gentle smile, his expression softening as he gazes at the girl who holds his heart. He pulls Yui into a protective embrace, telling Adelaide flatly that he cannot return her feelings because his heart is already taken. As Adelaide frantically screams that it's just instinct, he coldly declares he will never forgive anyone who holds malice toward his precious person. Adelaide lashes out in a jealous rage, screaming that Celeste only cherishes Yui because she is his fated mate and not out of love, while Celeste silently shields the girl from the verbal assault. Continuing her delusional rant, the maid argues that a rational master like Celeste isn't bound to his mate and could easily choose a different lover, desperately trying to invalidate their bond. Celine intervenes with a tearful shout, reminding her daughter that Celeste is the sole reason they own a home and have survived this long. She rebukes Adelaide for blaming Yui, the innocent girl who worried about her and never cast a single stone. Pointing a trembling hand toward the sofa, Celine demands that her daughter immediately apologize to Lord Celeste and Lady Yui for her treacherous behavior. Adelaide snaps and refuses to bow, shrieking that a slave's child deserves only rags while boasting that the stolen ornament looked far better on her own reflection. She arrogantly claims the jewelry belongs to her beauty, dismissing Yui as a frail, unworthy girl. Terrified for their lives, Celine physically grabs her daughter to silence her, screaming that such insolence in front of a dragonkin master is suicidal behavior. A sudden, crushing pressure descends as Celeste's grip on Yui's hand tightens instinctively, causing the young girl to look up in confusion at the shift in his demeanor. The atmosphere in the room instantly plummets to a freezing cold, a chilling aura that paralyzes the air even as the hand holding Yui's remains gentle and warm. Celeste remains motionless, the veins in his neck standing out as he barely contains the surge of power threatening to erupt from his silence. The dragonkin turns his gaze, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, primal fury that promises immediate retribution for the insult to his mate. Yui recalls that this is not the first time she has witnessed Celeste's fury, remembering the terrifying moment when her former master attacked her. She describes the sensation as an uncontrollable, flame-like surge of murderous intent that consumes everything in its path. The memory of that anger seizing her returns, specifically linking it to the time DC was used as a human shield. She notes that his current anger is different from instinctual rage, describing it as a quiet, heavy wrath stemming directly from his heart. Although the killing intent crackling in the air isn't directed at her, Yui still feels the overwhelming pressure radiating from him. The head maid realizes with dread that anyone without combat experience shouldn't even be able to move under the weight of such crushing intimidation. Mother and daughter cling to each other in terror as the suffocating atmosphere of the room presses down on them. Celeste breaks the silence, coldly stating that if Adelaide had simply admitted her fault and shown remorse, things might have been different. Celine responds with a trembling affirmative, acknowledging the master's judgment while her daughter looks on in confusion. The command is given with absolute finality as Celeste orders Celine to hand Adelaide over to the guard corps immediately. Adelaide panics, accusing her mother of lying, unable to comprehend that she is being sent to the authorities. Desperation takes over as she begs to just return the stolen item, claiming she only borrowed it a little. Celeste cuts her off, revealing the true depth of her crime by stating she also allowed a beastman slaver to enter the house. The revelation shocks everyone as he informs them that the captured man confessed to everything earlier that day. Adelaide stammers that she didn't want violence, only wishing for Yui to disappear, never expecting it to turn out so horribly. Celeste looks at her with a sorrowful expression and admits that he actually believes she didn't intend for it to get violent. However, he explains that while she may see it as a small feeling, for him it was the betrayal of a trusted person hurting his most precious one. He reveals that he knew the truth the moment he smelled her scent on the doorknob, yet he hesitated because he cared. He wanted to believe in her until the end, just as Celine must have prayed that her beloved daughter would never steal. Tears stream down Adelaide's face as Celeste delivers the crushing verdict that she has betrayed both him and her own mother. Celine prostrates herself on the floor, begging to be punished alongside her daughter as a parent who failed. Celeste gently tells Celine that with Adelaide gone, he is entrusting Yui's care entirely to her, absolving the mother of the crime. He turns his back on the weeping maid, his decision made and his posture unyielding. Adelaide breaks down completely, sobbing that she doesn't want this fate as the reality of her actions crashes down on her. He flashes his badge, identifying himself as Celeste Universe of the 2nd Guard Corps, 3rd Squad. With cold officiality, he declares that he is taking her into custody as a thief, sealing her fate. He orders the sobbing woman to stand up, his voice leaving no room for argument or further pleas. Later, a colleague remarks on Celeste's sharp ears, realizing that's how he figured out the situation and handed the girl over. He notes that since the attack was criminal level, Celeste could have been harsher, but the punishment was reduced because the victim was his mate. The colleague asks if Celeste is okay, knowing that he just arrested the daughter of a servant who has served him faithfully for years. Celeste lowers his head in resignation, admitting to his companion that the unfortunate outcome of the situation simply could not be helped. The officer analyzes the legal weight of the crime, noting that while the theft is a minor first offense, Adelaide will face judgment for aiding and abetting a kidnapping. Shifting focus to Yui, the man observes that the young girl seemed far more concerned about Celine's heartbreak than the theft of her own property. Celeste recalls Yui's selfless plea, remembering how she wished to keep the deed a secret to spare Celine's suffering as long as the stolen items were returned. He clasps his hands tightly as he addresses why he couldn't accept her wish, questioning what Yui would ultimately think of his integrity if he had overlooked Adelaide's crime. Haunted by the fear of losing her respect, Celeste explains he was terrified she would decide there was no point in ever telling him anything again. The thought of that honest girl losing her trust and stopping her reliance on him strikes at the core of his instinct to cherish his mate. Bowing his head in visible pain, Celeste confesses that the mere possibility of such an emotional severance was something he could not bear. The officer watches his friend closely, offering a thoughtful hum as he processes the depth of Celeste's attachment and reasoning. Leaning in with a tease, he remarks on how troublesome it is to be loved by servants, blaming Celeste's constant smiling for making humans misunderstand their dragonkin nature. Celeste falls silent at the accusation, his expression shifting as the weight of his unintended charm and its consequences sinks in. Turning toward the window, he accepts the critique and quietly resolves to be more careful with his demeanor from now on.